Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning and good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this interactive dialogue on multi-stakeholders and integrated approach to climate resilience finance. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dr. Huma Baloch. I'm Deputy Director of Programs at the Commission on Science and Technology for Sustainable Development in the South, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's event. As you are aware, presently the whole world's attention are set on the Sharm el-Sheikh for the 27th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP27. Today's dialogue is a part of the series of the events being held in the pavilion of the Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization to highlight diverse issues of climate change. This event is being held in collaboration with the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Efficiency in Egypt, Egyptian National Commission for UNESCO and ISESCO, and COMSAT. So this event is basically aims to provide an opportunity to discuss views on the evolving climate finance architecture and other necessary issues to be explored in terms of promoting better understanding of the climate resilience finance to meet the needs of the developing countries by catalyzing transformation in their economies. Without further ado, I will pass the microphone to today's our first speaker for the event, Professor Dr. Rahil Kamal, who is currently serving as the head of the Directorate of Science and Technology at the Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, ISESCO in Rabat. He's a tenured professor of biochemistry and molecular biology and the former rector at COMSAT University, Islamabad, one of the prestigious higher education and research institutions in Pakistan. His research specialization include enzymology, population and molecular genetics, and molecular pathology. Over to you, Dr. Rahil.
Thank you very much, Huma, for the introduction. We are having sort of a light issue here, so you will see the screen flooded with light. We're trying to get it off. Anyway, thank you very much. And the session on climate finance, I think is a very, very important topic and also fledged in COP27. And it is our first activity today from ISESCO. We have a total of about 50 activities, and this is the first one of them. All our sectors, basically we are science and technology, education, culture, interfaith dialogue, and strategic foresight, a lot of different sectors we work in, and everybody will be contributing in these different activities. All right, so we need to see, first of all, why there is a need for climate finance. What has happened that is leading us to really focus on this issue of climate finance. Basically, humanity has been on this planet, we humans have been on this planet for about 200,000 years. And the first 185,000 years, we lived very sustainably. But the last 15,000 years, we moved on to industrialization and use of fossil fuel and damaging the environment completely, basically. And that has resulted in an increase in greenhouse gases. If you look at the data from the 1800s, when the first industries were set up in Europe and US and other places, we see a gradual increase in not only CO2, but also the temperature and other greenhouse gases. So that is basically the root cause of this climate change that we are experiencing, a devastating experience we've recently had in Pakistan, where massive floods have inundated the country. So we need to really, address how we will go about, addressing these different issues which have come up. And mind you, it's in our concept note also, and I keep saying also, this problem has not been created by the third world. This is a problem which has been created by the industrialized countries. And in fact, in the third world countries, their contribution to greenhouse gases is minimal. So my problem arises when I go to my member countries and I talk to them about not using fossil fuel or trees or coal or anything. They say, what are we going to do? What are the alternatives? And those alternatives are should be our major focus, basically, providing them with cheap alternatives so that they can move away from these greenhouse creating fossil fuels and other things. If we do not provide them those facilities and we enforce upon them to stop using coal and all that, I think that is a little bit unfair. So now with green financing, what is happening is the Western countries now, they are putting in a lot of money into these countries to move to alternate fuels and stuff like that. But again, my problem again over there occurs that, if they don't even have enough to eat, how can they move to these other modes of fuel and energy? So we really have to come up with a sustainable model so that we can live sustainably. Like I said earlier, in our initial 185,000 days, humans were living very sustainably because the population density was not very high. It was about 25 people to a 5 square kilometer land piece. And as population would grow, they would move into other parts of the land. Population basically, human population began in Africa and then it moved out of Africa into different parts of the world. So I did a rough calculation that if we go back to that hunter-gatherer mode of sustainable living, how many people we can accommodate on this planet. And, taking the fact that if we level the mountains, if we are populating the ocean and everything, the total land mass, the number that comes out is 260 million people only that can sustainably live on this planet. Of course, as the population has grown to more than 7 billion right now, close to 8 billion, and in 2040, it will be close to 10 billion. We cannot live in that sort of a sustainable fashion. So we have to develop now technologies which will allow minimum basically damaging of the planet with maximum benefits for humanity also. We need to really sequester carbon also. I think that is one of the major things of when we talk about green technologies and greening. We should always remember it is not just planting trees, although, Saudi Arabia is doing a wonderful job of planting 10 billion trees. Pakistan has done 1 billion tree tsunami. But it involves a lot of other parameters also, use of solar energy or wind energy. If you use electric vehicle and at the back end you are using fossil fuel to generate your, to recharge your, vehicle, it is not, it is not renewable energy, with apologies. So you have to understand the whole process, even with clean energy, how do you generate clean energy? Clean hydrogen is a very big topic these days also. So to live sustainably, I think we have to accommodate and we have to adapt to the environment such that we cause minimum damage. Otherwise, this planet will become uninhabitable in the near future. And we really do not want, if that happens, we'll see the end of humanity. So I hope we, come up with a better understanding of these finance that we are talking about in climate change and how better we can modulate it such that it can benefit everybody and it can be a win-win for everybody. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And I hope we have a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you, Huma.
Thank you, Dr. Rahil, and wish you the successful convening of all events of ISESCO taking place at COM 27. Now I'm pleased to invite Ambassador Dr. Mohammad Nafeez Zakria, who has assumed charge as the Executive Director of COMSARS. A seasoned civil servant of Pakistan, Dr. Zakria joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1988. During his illustrious diplomatic career, he has represented Pakistan as a High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Malaysia, Minister Political Deputy High Commissioner in London, Consul General for Pakistan in Toronto, as well as various diplomatic assignments in Abu Dhabi, Jakarta, and Bangkok. He was also Pakistan representative to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNSCAP in Bangkok. And he has also recently served as a member Federal Public Service Commission of Pakistan. Dr. Sab.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my best wishes and greetings to all of you. I heard Professor Dr. Rahil Qamar, and I agree with him with his remarks as to what should be done and what is the urgency in addressing the challenges that climate change is actually posing to the world. But I think I'll go into further detail of that. But before that, I must also say that it's a matter of great pleasure and privilege to address this August gathering on behalf of the Commission on Science and Technology for Sustainable Development in the South. Thanks to the scientific and technological advancement that we are able to, interact face to face while sitting thousands of miles away from each other. The effort made by Islamic World Education, ISESCO, and the other international partner organizations of concepts towards holding this event are really commendable. It reflects their keen commitment to the cause of climate change, which is basically a formidable challenge, global challenge that warrants intercontinental cooperation and dedicated foreign policy initiatives. Uh, the level of participation from diverse stakeholders of different countries is really, really heartening to see. I'm fortunate to have assumed this office of the Executive Director of ComSets at such an opportune time when ComSets is at the forefront for raising awareness and addressing climate change related challenges and how emerging technologies could help deal with them through collaborative efforts among the key stakeholders in the member states. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is experiencing unprecedented variations in climatic conditions across globe with far-reaching implications. We have seen destruction of habitats, endangering of food security, and posing of socioeconomic challenges. And my assertions are not out of tune with the alarms raised by proponents of conservation and protection of environment. The country where from I am interacting with this gathering of nobilities has hugely suffered from the devastations caused by the floods of biblical proportions, which has very rightly pointed out by Professor Rahil, rendering millions of people displaced, loss of thousands of precious human lives, and destruction of livelihood and other associated challenges have come forward. African countries, I was reading this morning, will be the worst hit by the global climate change crisis. According to a study commissioned by Christian Aid, per capita GDP will suffer 34% on the average, while there will be 20% reduction in GDP growth rates by 2050 and 64% by the end of the century. So I think this also reflects the urgency and the emergency for the climate response evidently. Events of such magnitude necessitate that we treat this decade a decisive one to change the course of global warming, lest the challenge becomes insurmountable. Ladies and gentlemen, measures already comprehensively spelled out at the climate change conferences need no repetition, but pledge for implementation in the letter and spirit, appropriate use of technology in innovative ways through policy initiatives are needed. Ladies and gentlemen, government's responses to COVID-19 crisis have shown that when necessary, many large and middle-income economies are capable of taking unprecedented, impactful actions, and they were able to overcome this challenge to a great extent. Pakistan is one of those countries. We must seek effective partnerships and have structured dialogues with a wide range of actors to find novel insights and solutions in the fields of crucial importance like water and food security, urban mobility, energy, and land management. We must gather ideas and be willing to spend on research and development as well as multidisciplinary collaborations. An evidence-based strategy is necessary to ensure that financing for addressing climate change challenge is well placed for maximum impact. Investment in different set of assets as well as investment that meets the humanitarian imperative of social inclusion and poverty reduction are all necessary to support the transition to a climate resilient economy in line with the aims of Paris Agreement. Now, combating climate change requires not just government's intervention, but partnerships at all levels, including businesses, intergovernmental organizations, international organizations, and civil society. ComSets takes pride in establishing its Center for Climate Sustainability, a virtual and physical network of centers, institutions, and organizations working on environmental risks to help achieve climate-related sustainable development goals. This Center for Climate Sustainability is one of a kind effort that focuses on the nexus between climate change and sustainable development in the South. Since its inception in Now, since its inception in 2019, this center has organized 18 events, including webinars, knowledge exchanges, and dialogues that highlighted the relevant perspectives on transformative approaches needed to address the paramount challenges of climate change and sustainable development. Looking ahead, this center intends to step up cooperation within the framework of South-South and triangular cooperation to improve policy coherence among key ministries through better intersectoral coordination, capacity building, and raising awareness among government officials, policymakers, researchers, and civil society. We also want to intensify cooperation on sharing strategies and best practices to advance development and adoption of emerging technological options to combat climate change. Last but not least, at the end, I just want to also draw attention to what Professor Qamar has said, right? Qamar has said that we have to look for the alternatives. Now, these alternatives are not going to be easy. One, these alternatives would require the grip on the technology, emerging technologies to be applied, and they are not going to be cheaper options actually. So I think the countries that are responsible have a greater contribution in the deterioration of the environment and hence the resultant climate change crisis. I think they have to play a greater role, and the countries in this South, they have to reach out to them to seek concessions and seek necessary assistance to be able to adapt and adopt the new technologies to address the challenges posed by climate change. So I look forward to collaborating closely with all the stakeholders present here to ensure development along green, resilient, and sustainable path where no one is left behind. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Zakir. Our next speaker is Mr. Yusuf Olatuji, Senior Climate Change Specialist at Islamic Development Bank. His areas of expertise are climate finance, clean energy, water and agriculture. He has significantly contributed within challenging roles, administering, managing, coordinating, and providing inclusive and innovative development solutions. Over to you, Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omar and colleagues from COMSAT. First, greetings from Sharm el-Sheikh. We'd like to extend our sincere thanks to you from us here at the Islamic Development Bank for the invitation that has been extended to us by COMSAT and ISESCO for this very important side event. We actually thought that would have been able to join you physically in person at the Green Zone. But we understand some of the last minute changes that happened. So we're very happy to actually join virtually on this particular important topic. So I think for a very long time, we've actually had a lot of issues when it comes to financing climate action broadly. But then it's even much more complicated when you compare the financing that goes into adaptation and that goes into mitigation. And there are a lot of reasons for that. When you look at the whole climate finance landscape, in fact, we do not need anyone to tell us that there is a whole lot of preference for those that are actually investing in climate finance to actually go for climate mitigation activities than going for adaptation. And there are a lot of underlying issues, which today we've been able to make a lot of progress when you look at what we've done in the past years to where we are today. But I think one important thing that we really need to talk about is the fact that when you look at climate finance more broadly, why would an investor be interested in putting their money in mitigation and not be interested in putting their money in adaptation? The simple answer to that is the fact that one is more bankable than the other. One is more attractive to investors than the other. So it is much more attractive to an investor to actually put their money in a renewable investment than to put their money in ecosystem preservation. And the reason for that is that you would understand that when you look at the whole climate finance landscape, it is not that adaptation finance is not getting the needed attention that it gets. But the issue is, if you look at in the last 5 years, the proportion of adaptation finance that we have going to developing countries, it has actually increased significantly. But the bulk of that, they actually come largely from the multilateral development banks and development financial institutions, DFIs. Now, the issue is the bulk of the climate finance that the world needs are necessarily not going to come from those banks. They're going to come from the private sector. And the private sector, the primary objective for which they actually exist is actually for the aim of making profit. So if the sort of activities that we're looking at for adaptation projects are not profit-oriented, the private sector stakeholders are not going to actually see any incentive for them to actually invest in it. And that's the main reason why, for a very long time, we've had this huge gap between the amount of financing that actually goes for adaptation when you compare that to mitigation. But of course, for instance, if you look at the case of what the MDBs are doing, 3 years ago, we committed that by 2025, about 19 billion is going to be committed to adaptation out of our total financing. The good news is that last year, in 2021, we committed 61 billion jointly as MDBs. More than 90% of them already accounted for that, but that's very still so being attractive to the real place where you have the financing for climate action is actually one of the main challenges that adaptation has actually suffered. So the other part is around the reliability of data that is actually used to actually account for adaptation action. It's much easier for you to count the GHG emission that comes from mitigation projects, but it's difficult for you to actually talk about the benefits that comes from an adaptation investment. And because of that, private sector investors are not motivated to want to say, how do we report the contribution of the coastal protection project that we have? How do we report the benefit that comes from preserving a mangrove ecosystem, which we do know that there is a lot of benefit that comes from it. But then how do we actually account for them? So that unified standard that is available to be able to do that, I think it's something that makes it really, really difficult for private sector actors where the real money is for climate action, which makes it quite challenging. Now, it's not just important to talk about the issues, but then let's talk about the solution. So I'm going to give the perspective of the bank. So one of the things that we continue to do, because we understand that the only way we can make adaptation investment more attractive, whether to private sector actors, whether to development banks like ourselves, we know that capacity is very needed. And that's one of the things that we do with the area of technical assistance to our clients, particularly in those sector ministries that are traditionally very skilled towards mitigation projects, transport sector, energy sector, water and sanitation, agriculture. Those are sectors where we know that with the needed capacity, with the needed technical assistance, they can actually redesign investment that will make them much more attractive for private sector, where we're not just looking at the mitigation elements of this project, even though it's a low carbon transport, but we're looking at how can we increase the resilience of that investment. But that capacity to be able to do that, I think, is missing, and that's the reason why we find that many projects that eventually get to where finances get to pick them, they find them not really attractive when it comes to the mitigation elements. So these are one of the things that we do as MDBs to actually support our client in these areas to see, and we've done quite a number of capacity related initiatives at the regional level, even at in-country level, and we aim to continue to actually do that in the years ahead. The other part is around prioritizing adaptation. So the interesting thing is that in the bank, we are one of the very few MDBs where adaptation finance is actually a huge chunk of the climate finance that we actually provide. In fact, in the last 5 years, on average, 50% of the total climate finance that the bank actually provided were for adaptation activities. And that is something that is not shocking to us on the basis that when we did a survey about 5 years ago, 97% of our member countries stated adaptation is a priority for them. And that for us was something that made it for us to actually have those deliberate efforts towards prioritizing activities that are geared towards adaptation. Now, how do we do that? One of the fundamental things we do to ensure that this happens is that every project that we finance as a bank, they go through a climate screening. For a project for us to say this is an adaptation project, you need to understand the underlying risk, physical risk of that project, and then you adapt that investment to be able to actually address those related issues. So prioritizing adaptation at a strategic level, prioritizing adaptation from a policy perspective, I think this is something that can really help to actually do that. The third thing that is very important that we as MDBs were doing is around changing the way adaptation benefit is quantified. I think this is something, unless we change the way the benefit that comes from adaptation is quantified, whether in our project documents, whether it's in our assessment criteria, a whole lot of things are not going to change. The criteria on the way mitigation is quantified is very straightforward, but it's actually not clear today on how adaptation benefit is actually quantified. So, and this is actually an issue that continues to be a problem for many countries. So one of the things that we're currently doing together with our friends at the African Development is a system that is called adaptation benefit mechanism that helps us to actually quantify what are the benefits, what are the adaptation benefits of a particular investment that we put our resources into. And with this, we think once it is adopted by quite a number of stakeholders, they can help to actually mobilize more resources for that. So I'm going to stop there and just give the floor back to the colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf, for enlightening us. Our next speaker is Dr. Foy Delaney, expert at Science and Technology sector, ICISCO. He has over 20 years of professional experience in the field of environmental technologies, 12 years of experience at the International Center for Environmental Technologies in Tunisia, and 3 years at French Development Agency. Dr. Foy has a proven experience in implementing programs in several countries in the region, including Middle East and North Africa region, West Africa, and Central Asia, and has a strong and diverse network of partners. Over to you, Dr. Foy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huma. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ICISCO is very active this year in the COP27 with 50 activities in different fields, culture, science, and education. We are very active and we are very present in the COP27. This activity in finance is one of our activities during the whole period and is broadcasted directly in the COP in our booth in the COP27. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about climate change, we always consider three main issues: mitigation, adaptation, and finance. Unfortunately, developing countries are currently bearing the double burden of increasingly devastating climate impacts and the global pandemic. These countries face multiple threats from crises, not of their own making. Despite they are the least responsible for climate change, they are at the front line of its worsening effects. Climate change poses an existential threat to many countries because of the risk of loss and damage associated with it. From another side, they are asked and should be prepared to be more climate resilient and to adapt to climate change effects. This means being able to prepare for more serious and recurrent disasters due to the climate change effects on the globe. However, this cannot be achieved without financial support from developed countries. I wonder, as the world gradually recovers from the COVID pandemic and its social and economic repercussions, how can the developing and least developing countries overcome the challenge of recovering from COVID, while at the same time taking care of the effects of climate change if there is no enough help, support from donors? More urgently than ever, there is a need to more access to available resources to finance pandemic recovery efforts and also invest in climate action. Despite the international community's recognition of the needs and vulnerabilities of developing countries, the current climate finance system fails to meet their needs. At the 26th conference of the parties in Glasgow, the quality of climate finance and its accessibility to those who need it most was raised and discussed. It was duly recognized that the current climate finance architecture is enabled to operate efficiently, fairly, and at the speed and the scale needed. Within this decisive decade, developing countries voiced their disappointment that developing countries had fallen commitment to mobilize enough funds. On the other hand, we cannot deny that there is a gap and constraint on human and technical capacities to access climate finance throughout the project cycle, from origination, it means identification, to the implementation. The main challenge faced in gaining effective access to development and climate finance lies in the constraint of human and technical capacity to meet criteria of donors, proposals, and reporting requirements. In this regard, emergency support should be delivered through enhancing human capacity. This should be translated into supplementing activities, capacity through training and embedding experts and practitioners in governments, institutions, and implementing entities. At the international level, donors would have to scale up existing assistance initiatives and mechanisms and relax strict funding requirements. ICISCO, aware of all these challenges, has developed ambitious capacity building programs for the various actors in ICISCO member countries using several tools, trainings, studies, conferences to promote adaptation and mitigation solutions for climate action, and also to better understand natural disasters and train in the use of emerging technologies to deal with them. Regarding funding issues and access to finance, ICISCO itself contributes to the funding of small adaptation projects in its member countries at pilot level, mainly the WASH program in rural schools, in order to improve the resilience of rural communities to help adapt to extreme conditions. It encourages green startups and promote innovative green solutions and green concepts. In addition, ICISCO organized several training on project preparation for climate financing in several countries. The last one will be held this year, inshallah, in Cairo, on the sideline of COP27 on mentoring and coaching for project identification and preparation for bankable climate change projects from November 13 to 15, 2022, in collaboration with COMSATS and RICRI. I came at the end of my presentation, and I am at your disposal if there is any question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foyt. Now I'm pleased to invite next speaker, Professor Manal Fauzi, who is one of the founders of the Department of Environmental Sciences, Faculty of Science, Alexandria University, where she is currently acting as a full professor. She is the team leader of Green Technology Lab, chair of the Egyptian National Man and Biosphere Commission to UNESCO, and a member of International Union for Conservation of Nature Commission on Education and Communication. Professor Fauzi has been awarded UNESCO Young Scientist Award, Sultan Qaboos Prize for Environmental Preservation, University of Alexandria Prize of Scientific Distinction, and Alexandria University Prize for Recognition. She has obtained her PhD in plant biosystematics from Alexandria University. Her research contribution has mainly dedicated towards the conservation of natural resources, the use of indigenous plants species for remediation of polluted environment, and recently in the applications of nanomaterials for environment. Over to you, Dr. Manal.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to attend or participate in such an important and timely dialogue. Regarding the capacity building, I would say that the challenge posed by climate change to world community is enormous. All countries' production and consumption patterns must change if global temperatures are to be kept at 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. This transition has to be a national movement toward technology and regulations that spur new investments and integrate climate change into current systems. Additionally, major assistance must be given to strengthen the resilience of these systems, especially for the most vulnerable and impoverished people in developing nations who have made the smallest contribution to the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The amount of money needed to achieve just the transformation vision will be in range of hundreds of millions or billion of US dollars, while developed nations have the internal resource to generate and use climate finance. Many developing nations lack the financial resources or the institutional policy and skill systems needed to use climate finance effectively. Likewise, different countries have different capacities to absorb resources. These obstacles have more negative effects on vulnerable populations, including the poor and women, endangering the SDGs implementation, of course. In recent years, the international community has increased North-South public finance transfers for climate change initiatives in response to this scarcity. Governments have created and improved organizations like the Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, and most recently, the Green Climate Fund, as well as new and developing financial tools like performance-based payments for clean energy and reducing emissions from deforestation, degradation, and forest conservation. Furthermore, emerging nations have expanded their own national budgets as well as public investment on climate change initiatives. The international community must do more than just increase funding flows for isolated local efforts if climate financing is to be successful. The crucial concerns that are necessary to encourage changes at the national level must be addressed by the international community. Particularly, there has been a greater emphasis on creating and posting national institutions so they are ready to utilize climate finance in ways that encourage adjustments to national patterns of production and consumption. The country must have the ability to plan for obtain, deliver, monitor, and report on climate finance, both domestically and internationally, in a way that is catalytic and completely integrated with the attainment of the SDGs. Capacity building is frequently used in discussions about climate change and sustainable development. Everyone supports capacity building, and the global environmental institutions have long emphasized its significance and responsibility. Actually, an integral chapter on capacity building and technology, which laid out a sophisticated framework by which indigenous capacities in developing countries could be supported and built upon through a wide range of activities, including collaborative actions, educational investments, and any number of partnerships, was one of the key outcomes of the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development meeting. However, due to insufficient climate action, we have already wasted valuable time, and the window to stay below the 1.5 degree limit is rapidly closing. The requirement for adequate ability to progress and accelerate climate action is brought even more into starker attention by the speed at which we are observing changes in the local and global climate. One of the biggest difficulties, if not the biggest challenge, that poor countries will face in the ensuing decades will be addressing the interconnected climate and development essentials. It is possible to make great progress on a number of fronts by tackling the complex problem of developing capacity for climate and development holistically, rather than separately. The potential of such collective strategy is increasingly being recognized. It is now necessary to address capacity in an organized and comprehensive manner, actually. Though preparing strong project proposals, comprehensive climate change adaptation plans, and accreditation with any of the climate funds are challenging processes, especially when employing a direct access modality. To address these issues, a number of development organizations and environment and the climate funds are helping governments enhancing their capacity in order to address these concerns. The capacity of developing nations, particularly the least developed countries and small undeveloping states, to address the countless issues related to climate change, including obtaining and managing sizable amount of climate money, is variable and occasionally constrained. Moreover, Support for preparation and capacity building, which are positioned within this context, is also important and is also impacted by a lack of finance. The UNFCCC's financial institutions, including the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, have nevertheless developed readiness and capacity building programs that provide a number of complementary, although occasionally overlapping supports. The JAF and AF jointly gave little under $40 million annually to support climate change adaptation and mitigation readiness, with the AF providing an additional $1 million specifically for adaptation. The Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, JEF, also provides an annual contribution of about $29.8 million, with the remainder funds coming from climate investment funds and other sources. Although there have been good progress, more work still needs to be done. While only a small percentage of the world's countries, institutions, and organizations are getting the training and assistance for improving their capacities needed to enable success climate change adaptation action. Although there are many different aims for capacity building, success depends on paying close attention to local environments, since it helps identify who needs to have their capacity strengthened and how, as well as the appropriate approach to take and how should do it and who should do it. It is also evident that capacity buildings need to involve a variety of stakeholders, especially those for marginalized communities, in order to be aware and responsive to multiple perspectives concerning the local context and requirements. Since the different stakeholders may have very different views on development, reaching agreement on major priority areas is very crucial. This is especially true if the goal is to integrate climate and development goals as it should be. The majority of developing nations continue to face considerable capacity issues that limit their ability to fully or effectively implement the climate initiatives they wish to pursue, notwithstanding the vast range of international and bilateral efforts. At the end, I will introduce you to some of the primary challenges or obstacles. First of all, a lack of public understanding and support for taking action on climate change in nations. Secondly, information fragmentation, a lack of training in evaluation techniques and procedures, specialists and research institutions, and a lack of international assistance of acquiring and maintaining knowledge and institutional or organizational capacities. Also, the absence of well-established or robust policies, systems, and procedures that new or existing bodies or entities would use to effectively plan, manage, and coordinate capacity building activities, as well as the supportive environments required to meet national climate change goals, including education. I would conclude my speech by the following. Actually, we need to come up with a thorough work plan to identify capacity gaps and needs, promote the creation and use of relevant tools and approaches, encourage regional, national, and subnational cooperation, examine ways to improve collaboration, coordination, and coherence across existing organizations and activities both inside and outside the UNFCCC. Compile best practices and learning in order to improve ownership and capacity retention at the national, regional, and subnational level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manal. Our next speaker is Dr. Suhail Malik, who is the Technical Team Leader at Climate Resourcing Coordination Center. Dr. Suhail has over 40 years experience in steering non-governmental, bilateral, multilateral, private, and public sector operation. He has managed multi-sector complex projects in sustainable development, poverty alleviation, climate change, financial services, and is well versed with all aspects of the project lifecycle of international financial institutions. Dr. Sohail has also worked at the Green Climate Fund during its embryonic stage as the head of the portfolio management. Dr. Sohail, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huma. Coming at the end of the talks, I think it's not to repeat what has been said, because a lot of my points were covered in the earlier by the earlier speakers. But I'm so overwhelmed by the speakers that I just can't help quoting His Excellency Ambassador Nafis when he talks about partnerships, transformation, transformative approaches, and all those, because these were the things which I was going to kind of talk more about, because in multi-stakeholders common approach for climate action, these are important pillars. And I mean, also Brother Yusuf, in his also he talked about while talking about climate finance landscape, he has touched upon climate screening and all other things. But I mean, and not to say that other speakers, Professor Dr. Manal and others, I mean, they have covered most of my stuff. But nevertheless, let me just kind of start from where we are in the context. I mean, the reality of the matter is that even though climate is central to achieving, I mean, climate action or climate finance, whatever you can say, is central to achieving low carbon climate resilient development. But still, I mean, the architecture remains complex and evolving. Even the fund flows through multilateral and bilateral, through regional and national funds. That kind of a flowing mechanism is quite complex. And on top of it, if you add that there's no agreed definition of what constitutes climate finance, makes monitoring of these flows extremely difficult. So, I mean, the wide range of mechanisms, they continue to challenge coordination. So I mean, when we come to the multi-stakeholder common approaches, I would approach it from two levels. If I look at the strategic level, and if we look back at this whole evolution of aid effectiveness, development effectiveness, we see a number of, events, a number of agreements which try to kind of bring all these issues in a manner that there is harmony in the things. Even if we look at the 5 principles, of aid effectiveness, they talk more or less the same things which we talk in the climate change perspectives. I mean, if they are like, one is national ownership, alignment between donor funding and country priorities. This is common to climate change, harmonization of donor activities, managing for results, and mutual accountability. These are basically the 5 principles. But I mean, what I'm trying to make a point is that in this evolution, the climate change work has also evolved or also built upon the experiences of this whole development effectiveness pathway. So when we talk about the objective of this whole, climate approach, when we talk about its objective is to promote the paradigm shift. I mean, the word there is the paradigm shift towards low emissions and climate resilient development pathways. So, I mean, there the whole issue is about transformational shift, which Ambassador Nafis had mentioned. And that's where I built my strategic level construct, that we have come to a point that we all have to come together, the stakeholders, the multi-stakeholders, that we go for a transformational shift from a socio-economic development, which we have been pursuing for over, many years, and that from that pathway to an integrated climate change and sustainable development strategic approach. So this needs to be, that will bring the transformation, because in the end, the ambition is so high that until and unless, one, we strategically are aligned in a manner that we have the impact which carries us closer to this ambition, that is one. Two, what Brother Yusuf had also mentioned and others have also mentioned, bringing in the private sector, because the accelerators or the financial accelerators would come from the private sector. So if I come back to this integrated climate change, sustainable development strategic approach, I feel this is inevitable. We have to move in that direction in order to ensure that we have an impactful approach. So, I mean, what does this mean? What Yusuf had also mentioned, that it is all about climate-driven development anchored in all intervention programs and projects. The reason is that when you look at the when you look at the sustainable development domain, you see that the projects or the interventions or the actions, what you do, they mainly, I mean, they fall within the human and natural. This is one sphere, human and natural systems, and then the other is the socio-economic development. But I mean, the human and natural systems are affected by the climatization or the climate actions like disasters, like droughts, like floods. So whatever work we do, until and unless we cater for this risk which has become pronounced and which at times has overtaken or even eaten away the progress we have made in different priority sectors, we cannot have the impact. So we are kind of becoming, interdependent on the two sides, on the climate change and on the sustainable development side. So they have to come together to produce the impact. So that I will stop here because that is at the strategic level. But when we come to the operational level, I mean, we have been discussing in the development effectiveness and aid effectiveness discourse that there should be more donor harmonization. There should be more, more coming together, and that's what the common approaches talk about. That you should have one on the planning, on the implementation. All these approaches, all these actions should be becoming more harmonized, so that the recipients are already hurt and already, I would say, shattered with all these climate shocks. And if you, on top of it, add a variety of different tools, different approaches, different ways of doing things, then you're adding insult to the injury. So it's high time that we come together. We have common kind of requirements, common features in our approaches. When it comes to proposal development, processing, even in climate change projects, accreditation, even MRVs, in compliance, in all those things, if each and every institution, there are hundreds, not hundreds, but I shouldn't be overstating, but there are multiple institutions, if I call only the major ones, if they have their own islands of requirements, then the recipient would all be drowned with meeting with those requirements and not with the implementation or the impact or the effectiveness or getting the results of. So these are the things which need to be really looked into. We have the stage set where we have moved from silo implementation. We have moved towards multi-stakeholder processes. As Ambassador Nafees said, that we are now, I like his statement when he said, no one is left behind. I mean, we have to make it more inclusive and bring those things together. And moreover, the private sector part is very important. There are challenges. I can dwell on that, but I mean, we can keep it for discussion on that part. That what are the key challenges? There can be a separate session on the private sector challenges. Why private sector has not been able to come in an effective way in the multi-stakeholder processes. So, I mean, I will stop here because a lot of it has been said. I'll be just repeating myself in so many ways, and we can just keep more time for discussion if it's possible, if there are any questions which we may like to answer. Thank you very much, Dr. Umar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suhail. I would request if the participant have any questions to hold on that questions till the end of all the addresses, or you can post these questions in the chat box. Okay, so now I'm pleased to invite our next speaker, Mr. Ahmed Mohammed Abdul Rasul, who is an environmental expert at Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency RECRE in Egypt. He has a several-year experience in environmental and social impact assessment, including strategic environmental and social assessment, stakeholder engagement plan, environmental and social action plan, and he has previously worked on the several projects on setting up long-term energy planning scenarios for the Arab countries. Over to you, Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed, can you hear us?
I think he has connection problem, so we can move to the question waiting him.
Okay, so if we still do not have Mr. Ahmed with us, so Mr. Yusuf Olatunji, are you here?
Yes, Dr. Omar, but I'm going to be dropping off in about a few minutes. But yeah, I'm here for a few minutes and then I have to drop off for another session.
Okay, so if you can quickly address one of our questions, that the majority of our climate funding is allocated to initiatives that lower greenhouse gas emissions. So are we aiming for a balance between financing for climate change mitigation measures and for those who help people adapt to the effects of the climate change?
So, thank you so much, Dr. Omar. I think the question is actually very much related to some of the points that I've actually mentioned earlier, which is around how do we actually ensure that certain things that are needed to incentivize adaptation activities would help us actualize that goal. It's about putting out the incentive where we have the critical mass of the investment for climate finance more broadly, and that's the private. That's where it's gonna be. That's where we can actually get those things done. If we go on the trajectory that we're going on today, I'm sorry that we may not be able to actually actualize those climate adaptation goals that countries have actually committed. At least the good thing is that today, loss and damage is becoming a very critical part of that, increasing the share ambition of a whole lot of to be fully mainstream, that it cannot just be in terms of the financing that's available for it. Certain mainstreaming there to be done at every level of the financiers as well as of the countries that are actually in need of these various initiatives. I talked about the place that technical assistance play. Sometimes the tools to really understand what the risk of an investment is, of what a project, of what a community is, those tools are not easily accessible to every person. They can be very expensive. So the question is, how are we willing to actually finance those sort of tools that makes it ready? Because it's basically, we can't solve the real problem without addressing the underlying issues. So the underlying issue is the knowledge that is available to say, how do we prepare an investment like this to become bankable, even though it's an adaptation period? How do we make it attractive? But those things require certain numbers. It requires quantification, which is something that you find a lot in mitigation. And as far as we know, there isn't much that is out there when it comes to that. Of course, there is a lot of work that is being done, even among the MDBs. We have the joint MDB methodology that is being developed, but it's not sufficient enough to really quantify the adaptation benefit that comes from investment that is actually made to adaptation. But until we're able to do that, we may really, really struggle to actually get those adaptation numbers. But we're seeing a lot of progress. And as Dr. Sahil already mentioned, the issue is that many of the financing for adaptation, they keep coming from not the right sources where you would get the bulk of the money. They're coming for sources where they can help us de-risk private sector actors to be able to come into it. MDBs, specialized funds, their role are mainly to help de-risk some of those sectors that private sector would typically want to come to invest. So, and as you rightly mentioned, as colleagues have mentioned, it has to be collective. It's not just the MDB. It has to be private sector, it has to be institutional investors. It's a it has to be community level. It has to be a whole lot of different stakeholders coming together to be able to actually push this agenda. I'm going to stop there to give the floor back to you, Dr. Omar.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf, for being with us.
Dr. Homa, Dr. Abdul is connected, so please, if you can give him the floor.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Ahmed.
Good morning all. I'm sorry for the bad connection. I'm in the COP, but I'm happy to be with you today.
Mr. Ahmed, you may continue to address this August gathering.
Homa, I think they have a connection problem in the COP, so please we continue with the questions, and then when he will manage this, we will come back to him. Okay.
Okay, so if we do not
Hello, do you
have
hear
me? Mr. Ahmed, are you here?
Hello?
Mr. Ahmed, can you hear us?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning. I'm very sorry for such an interruption, but I'm glad to be with you all today.
Mr. Ahmed, you may continue to deliver your address.
Thank you all. I would like to thank Dr. Manal, Dr. Sahil, and all of the esteemed speakers today, because they tackled a very important problem that we are facing here, especially in the developing country, which is the case of the lack of finance. From our perspective, RCRI is considered the technical arm for the Arab League of States. From our position, we had performed some technical assessment for the NDCs that had been announced by the Arab League of States, and out of 17 countries, and through their national determined contributions, we had find that there is a big gap between the needs for the finance and the actual finance that had been received from different lending agencies. We had performed the assessment for around 17 countries from 8 different lending agencies, starting from for example, the GCF, the Climate Fund, and all of these agencies, especially also for the least developing countries. And we had found that we have a gap of around $100 billion to support the conditioned requirements for these countries. From out of since 2003 till 2020, only $24 billion had been supported for the countries, while the required needs for only 8 countries from the Arab leagues that had announced their requirements is around $140 billion. This gap needs to be addressed not only from the negotiation team, but also from the developing team that are working to request the finance. We had identified a methodology to achieve this support from the different lending agencies, and we had identified 3 main steps. The first one is the status quo analysis. The status quo analysis provides some market assessment and the potentiality for the market to attract the international investors, and also to convince the lending agencies beside the IFIs to start supporting the implementation of new technologies and support with new projects for the developing countries. The other step will be the business modeling, and which is the developing of the requirements of the lending agencies and providing feasibility studies according to these requirements to facilitate achieving these support. At the end, the sustainability, and the sustainability will come through the cooperation between the private and the public sector. We had seen that when the finances start domestically from the governments, this is considered one of the attractive actions that support different lending agencies and international financial institutes to provide countries with the required finance from different sides, from the grants, from the loans. But at the end, the sustainability comes first from the government, then it's supported, of course, by the different agencies. I will not take more of your time. I'm at your disposal, and thank you for giving me this chance.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad. While we have you here, there is a question from one of the participants, Dr. Mehwish. She asked that the strategic environment assessment has a vital role in green economy. It can bring a huge impact in addressing the issues at the planning and policy level. How can we ensure its applicability in the various regions and levels without the political will and ineffective institutions? Mr. Ahmad, can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes. There is a question for you from one of the participants. Maybe you can see it on the chat box too.
Yes.
The strategic environment assessment has
thank you, doctor.
Yeah.
Yes, sure. If you go to the requirements and the standards that are identified by the main lenders nowadays, which are the IFC and the EBRD, you will find that they identified different standards and requirements. And most of them, of course, they are aligned with the SDGs, but also each of them has his requirements that had been to be covered within developing the reports. Of course, the environment with its different aspects regarding the biodiversity, the resources management, the waste management, the reduction of the use of the existing raw material, in addition, of course, of taking into consideration the gender equity and not affecting the indigenous people. All of these aspects are to be taken in consideration when we are in the stage of developing reports to achieve some support from these funding agencies. So yes, you are totally right. The environment is one of the main cornerstones that have been taken into consideration when we are requesting support or funding for projects, especially, of course, energy projects.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed. My next question is for Dr. Manal. Dr. Manal, how do you see the role of the government in facilitating the involvement of the private sector in climate change adaptation?
Thank you, Huma. Indeed, governments have a critical role to play in supporting and stimulating private sector investments in adaptation in order to engage the private sector in helping vulnerable populations prepare for the effect of climate change. In my point of view, developing countries in particular can take three types of actions. The first of these actions is to scale up private sector investments private sector investment for resilience. Actually, some private companies are already investing in adaptation, whether it is through the designing or redesigning climate resilient products, protecting their supply chain from extreme weather, or incorporating climate change into their charitable and community outreach activities. In these instances, where the private sector is already investing in adaptation, government action is most useful in scaling up investments and ensuring that they reach vulnerable populations. Government can do this by raising awareness about climate change and providing technical assistance to help companies in specific sectors adapt to its effect. Other options also include occasional loans, match funding, tax credits for strategic adaptation investments, grants or subsidies, or extension of credit lines to the financial industry. In all cases, the action that governments take to support current adaptation investments will vary according to the maturity of the private sector, the type of the private firm, and the industry. The second action is to correct market failures. While some private companies are already taking action, others have yet to invest in adaptation. In these cases, government action can help correct these market failures. Private businesses are cautious to invest in adaptation when climate resilient investments present an added cost or a higher risk. Yet in many cases, this investment is necessary for the sustainability of the firm or the benefit of the community. Governments can address this interaction in a few ways. Number one, they can create policies that have indirect effect on building resilience among vulnerable populations, such as introducing tiered water pricing schemes as a way to stimulate investments in water conservation. More carefully managed water could help provide stable supply in drought-prone regions. Secondly, governments can incentivize innovation, such as creating business competitions or small business incubators that stimulate the development of local climate change solutions. Also, governments can also set standards and regulation, developing and enforcing climate smart building standards, for example, would ensure the business invest in climate resilient structures, such as hotels that can withstand storms or high winds if they are located near the beach. Climate smart zoning regulations might shift new hotel development back from the water altogether. The last action is public-private partnership. There are certain situations where private sector investments are unlikely. These typically occur when an investment is seen as public good that is unprofitable, as in the case with water infrastructure, flood protection, social safety nets, and disaster management. The public sector is the main source of investment for goods and services like these. Nevertheless, governments can still urge the private sector to play a role, either by implementing government-funded projects or through public-private partnership. I will give one example for this. At the agriculture sector, for instance, if a drought hits a country, the public sector will pay for a supply and supply the population with food provisions. But governments can enlist the private sector to deliver these supplies throughout the country. The private sector has the transport capability, while the government has supplies that need to be delivered. Additionally, the public and the private sector could partner together to build the large-scale water tanks or construct canals that bring water to areas that are water scarce. This type of relationship benefits the private sector and public sector, and vulnerable communities. All will be all win situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manal. As we can see on the chat box, the same question has been asked by Mr. Irfan Hay to Dr. Suhail. Dr. Suhail, if you are with us, please can you comment on this?
Can you please repeat the question for me? Thank you.
The question from one of the participants is how to effectively engage with private sector for achieving climate change action. If you can share some good examples.
The examples are we have excellent examples for private sector involvement in energy sector, we have in renewables, we have. So I mean, there are many examples where private sector has come in, and it has also provided a leverage of, which is a must, which is kind of in climate finance, it is required leveraging the financing. So they have leveraged from 3 to 10 times the amounts provided by the climate financiers. So I mean, in those projects, we have a kind of a array of experiences where projects have not or taken long time to take off, or even to they have not been that successful. The impact has not been that significant, but in many of the programs, the impact is there. So, I mean, I think it's more important that one has to look into what are the issues that, the private sector kind of experiences which have to be addressed, because in order to bring in private sector, you need to make their kind of requirements or meet their requirements, as earlier Brother Yusuf had said, that their issue is of profitability. But what development financing does not offer, like the classical development financing, is to cover their risk. And what climate finance offers is the risk side. So climate finance, when it covers the risk, then you see a number of private sector projects come in. But I mean, the unfortunate part is that we still, the private sector still confronts a lack of strategic and regulatory framework. They just are hurt by the inconsistent policy support, such as direction and interruption of regulatory incentives. So all these things, they play against their, against them. But most of the developing countries have issues like, the capital markets are nascent. I mean, that's again, it's not a good go for a private sector to come in and play in that. And the credit and the equity markets are shallow. That's also an issue for the private sector. And liquidity is also thin. But I mean, to top it all, I mean, one of the main issues which private sector confronts is the local currency financing. Now, that's where the things really are kind of have a problem, that the currency fluctuation risk has an impact on project developers, as it adds to the asset liability mismatch. So I mean, even though it is the local currency lending is a key for the viability of climate finance deals in developing countries, in most of the countries, you don't have a swap market. That is the unfortunate part of it, or appropriate financial mechanism and rules around the use of local currency risk hedging instruments. So, I mean, the demand-supply mismatch is there. It extends across the entire value chain. I'm sorry, I'm just dwelling on the issues and challenges, because I still feel that there is a lot of opportunities still need to be harnessed when it comes to private sector. I mean, you had asked particularly about the successful projects. I can quote many which extend from Latin America to Indonesia, which specifically Green Climate Fund had financed. But I mean, I cannot quote the success because they are long-term projects. So, I mean, it will be too early to talk about the successes. There have been deals made, but I mean, it will be difficult for me to reflect on the successes at the moment. Thank you, Dr. Huma.
Thank you, Dr. Suhail. One of my group member at Council headquarters, they communicated that Ambassador Dr. Nafees Zakia would like to add to one of the questions. Dr. Saf?
Thank you very much. Actually, it's not a question. Basically, I was listening to all the points made by different speakers, and I was thinking about certain things. I think one of the aspects which was talked about was how to attract the private sector to invest in these areas of alternative and renewable energy sectors. I believe that it cannot happen while sitting here in this room, but we'll have to run some sort of a campaign to create awareness among them so that they are able to understand the utility and the benefits that will come by adopting to these new technologies for alternative energy and renewable energy. Secondly, I believe that we have a number of speakers have also pointed out about the funding and financing for the projects. I think we'll have to look into the aspect of self-reliance. Self-reliance, not in terms of expertise and human capital, but also in terms of even financing for that matter. I think the countries in the South, they have enough capacity to fund the researchers and researches to the advantage, in the long-term advantage, and in various areas of interest. Dr. Srail made a very important point. I don't know, he made it in passing, but it was a very important point. I think we need to check the countries like the members in COMSETs and its partner organizations. At what stage of development in terms of technology and science we are actually, so that we are able to see what our capabilities are, and then put our the expertise together to find solutions, to carry out researches, and to also do projects at a smaller scale, and then apply it on larger scales. Sharing of technical know-how and transfer of technology is another question mark, because the commercial interest of the countries that are technologically advanced, although they have contributed a lot in terms of deteriorating the environment and creating this crisis situation of climate change, they are at a much higher stage of development in science and technology. They have the technologies, but they are more focused on driving the commercial benefits from those technologies rather than sharing those technologies with the countries that are in need of it. And they are actually suffering because of their contribution to the climate change crisis, and not something that we have done from our side. It has been, I pointed out that how Africa is going to suffer. And Christian Aid has actually commissioned a study which gives very alarming figures in terms of the impact climate crisis is going to make on the economies of the African countries. So I think we need to look at that also, how those commercial interests of the developed countries are rationalized to meet the requirement, to enable the developing countries to easily adopt the new technologies and be self-reliant in this context. For funding, I think we also, like, for example, Islamic Development Bank official, he pointed out a number of things. We need to closely study and see that how we can align our requirements with the funding capacity of various institutions and other sources. Corporate sector responsibility, social responsibility is one element that we need to emphasize during our campaign with the business sector to attract investment, to engage them into a project that would eventually benefit everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Nafisa. My next question is for Dr. Foyt from ICISCO. The question is how ICISCO is helping. Dr. Foyt, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
So the question is how ICISCO is helping its member countries for the rise of climate finance within the its member developing countries, and has ICISCO taken or plan to take initiatives to improve the linkage between R&D centers, universities, and industry within its member countries? We all know that the big corporation will have to adopt greener ways for production and consumption. However, the private sector complains that the academia and R&D is failing to provide sustainable alternatives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Homa. I already in my presentation gave an overview about ICISCO contribution regarding climate finance and climate change adaptation and mitigation. But let me remember in a few words how ICISCO is helping its member countries. We are mainly emphasizing in capacity building, and we did many activities regarding these trainings in our member countries, in different member countries, how to build climate project, how to prepare the NDC, national determined contribution, how we can get access to financing. And our training in Cairo also, it will be another opportunity to build and to mentor and to coach relevant stakeholders, how to build projects that can be easy, accessible to financing, and to raise a chance to get financing. So from the other side, ICISCO also is developing many projects regarding water and sanitation in rural schools. This project started with 4 countries. Now we have 7 countries who are benefiting from this project. And this project target to help and to our member countries and our rural community to face climate change adaptation issues. Also, we are promoting green startups from the idea to the building of the project, and we are helping youth to build their own startups and green startups mainly. This is almost what we are doing, and we are promoting also concepts through conferences, seminars, and developing strategies and orientation documents regarding this, like smart and sustainable cities documents, green transformation documents, and how we can help youth and girls to involve in climate change action. So this is mainly what we are doing in ICISCO, and we are developing several programs, and this will be continue, inshallah, in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Foyt. We have one last question. So from Faryal Ashraf. She asked this question to any of the speakers who would like to respond. What are the latest technology that are being used in monitoring climate changes, and how could one justify its procurement for funding agencies?
Yes, many innovative technologies now is developed. Mainly, not only when we talk about climate change adaptation and mitigation, it's not only technologies, but also we can say solutions, because solution can be technical, but it can be also managerial solution. There is many new concepts that raised in the world, like green economy, circular economy, this green growth. And all these are new concepts, are not technology, but are new concepts. For example, smart and sustainable cities. But in the same side, in the other side, there is innovation and technologies. And for this, there is many what we call green technology for air pollution, for water treatment, for wastewater treatment, and all this technology are helping in adapting to the climate change and to mitigate climate change. For example, for mitigation, there is renewable energy, and now we are talking about green hydrogen and the developments of green hydrogen in the world. So technology exists and is developing from year to year. For example, now we are also talking about artificial intelligence using satellite images, emerging technologies, and all this this technology we harness this technology for the aim and for the target to reduce climate change impact in the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foyt. So with this, as we have come to the closing of this dialogue, thank you so much to ICESCO, RICRI, Egyptian National Commission, I guess Cisco delegation and RICRI is already participating in the COP27. We wish you successful participation there. And we wish to see Dr. Manal in Sharm el-Sheikh soon too. And thank you all the participants for putting up the questions that incited this discussion. So we hope to see you again on the upcoming events to be held by ComSets and ICESCO and RICRI again on the 16th of November. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a pleasant day, all of you.
Homa, can I just say a few words, please?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I've listened to everybody's talk today, and mostly everybody's been talking about, the government sector and the private sector and the public sector. But the major stakeholder, which is the general public, everybody's, not discussing about them also. How the different technologies that we are bringing in, how it will affect them. If we talk about net zero, it is the net zero which will affect the common people, the people sitting in remote areas will be devoid of energy, of warmth, of cooking material and all that. How do we address that? I think that is very important. When I was rector of ComSet University, we ran a campaign on just say no to plastic. And that campaign was so successful that the parliamentarians came on board also, and they banned it in Islamabad. They banned the shopping bags, plastic shopping bags in Islamabad completely. Now, if you talk to the common man, they do not understand how microplastics pollute the environment and how it is mitigating the environment. So we need to emphasize, excuse me, we need to we need to emphasize that, it is not just greening which is important for climate change mitigation, but also technologies for like carbon capture, and also technologies which will enable people for sustainable living and sustainably moving on. Do realize majority of the people live in backward areas, and in cities, very few of the people live in the developing countries, maybe 30%, but the 70% live in villages and all that. And those are the people we have to address. We have to tell them, what is the problem with using plastic bags, and what are the problem if you burn the wood and all that, and educate them. Unless we do that, I think all our efforts of our private sector and public sector is geared towards failure. Thank you very much, everybody, for this wonderful intervention. Really pleased to see you all again and meet you all. And ComSet also thanks you all, and ComStech thanks you all, and RICRI thank you all for your intervention and for your very enlightened views. Thank you very much. Maasalam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahil. I had this kind of a sort of one question in my mind, which I will share later on with all of the speakers right after this meeting. It was actually to be asked to Dr. Ahmed Abdul Rasul, but he's not here. This question was sort of the same what you mentioned it. The prioritization of a large-scale project tend to result in the preference for example, on-grid as opposed to the off-grid renewable energy infrastructure, which also tend to reinforce the technological preferences of the influential stakeholders and exclude smaller projects. So as a result, it could worsen the reduce grant incapacity inequalities with the most vulnerable people reaping little or no advantages at all. So I hope to get the response from all of the speakers right after this meeting. Administrator, can you kindly please turn on your cameras for a group photo, and then it will be the end of the dialogue. Dr. Fouad, are you with us? The technical team at ICISCO headquarters in Rabat, can you please turn on your video? Okay, thank you so much. I wish you a pleasant day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very
bye-bye.
much. Bye. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Bye.